Ladies and gentlemen, kicking off the first stop on his world tour, our new president and prophet, Russell M. Nelson! You say you want some revelation, well, here you go. It's gonna blow your freaking mind.
Greetings, brothers and sisters. Welcome to the weekly Mormon News Roundup. I'm your humble host, D-Base, which is talent on loan from Kolob. My crew and I ruminate weekly on the great and spacious beehive, so thanks so much for joining us to discuss the latest current Mormon events. This is episode 81, and it's October 17th, 2023. We have Ryan Josiah from TikTok. He's co-hosting. We're going to be keeping you up to speed on Tim Ballard, who's been sued not once, but twice now. We're going to fill in all the details. The clip from Elder Bednar has gone really viral. We're going to break that down for you, and we're going to give you much, much more. If you want to get in touch with me, I'm at www.mormonnewsroundup.org, or you can send me an email to kolob@mormonnewsroundup.org. I'd like to invite onto the program my fabulous co-host, Ryan Josiah. Ryan, how's it going?
Hi, so glad to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I've been a big fan of yours for a very long time. Now, what is your 1 minute Mormon story, Ryan?
Well, a bit of my background. I just come from a very Mormon family, as Mormon as you get. I think just about every line of ancestry of mine goes back to the pioneers. So lived a very Mormon life, checked all the boxes, got my Eagle Scout, graduated from seminary, served a mission when I turned 19. When it came time to go to college, of course, I went to BYU because there was no other option in my mind anyway. While at BYU, my senior year at BYU, I met and married my wife within the same semester at BYU. So we were one of those couples. And then a couple of kids, and several years later, we both kind of, we had some individual and marital issues that inspired us to get into individual therapy, I guess. And individual therapy changed how we thought about everything, including spirituality. And so our spiritual journey has changed we've changed quite a bit in the last few years. We no longer participate or believe in the core aspects of Mormonism, but I consider myself more of a cultural Mormon, ethnically a Mormon type of thing. And it's still a serious hobby of mine to delve into not only the current events of what's happening within the church, but also I am a bit of a history nerd. I've spent a lot of time learning about the ins and outs of Mormon history, more specifically with polygamy, as my ancestry has a lot of Mormon polygamy in it. So learning about Mormon polygamy history is learning about my own family history. And so, yeah, that's what brought me here is my spiritual journey and being able to have a platform like TikTok to share what I've learned with others, essentially.
Yeah, speaking of TikTok, you're out here. You have a very popular channel here, Ryan, that's got a lot of followers on it. What is your TikTok channel? What do you do there? What's it all about?
Well, I started it because of a coworker, friend of mine who kept pushing me to, I would talk with him about things that were happening within the church and share with him my opinions and things. And he kept saying, oh, you would do so well on TikTok. You could do so if you just said that type of thing. And then I just didn't have the confidence, and I especially didn't have the know-how of doing TikTok. So I eventually did get started with his help as he showed me how to make videos, how to do some video editing. And so I started with this goal of just sharing what I have learned in my, nerding out about history and what's happening within the church and church news and history. I made some videos on just these big things like the Second Amendment type of Second Amendment. You can tell it's been happening in the news right now. The Second Anointing.
Oh, okay.
And what happens with the Second Anointing and just big things like that, like going through the history. And then I've just gone on from there with whatever's happening with current events, kind of like what you do on your channel here, following the news, reacting to what's happening within the church, reacting to comments within TikTok as far as what's happening there. There's a whole world, a whole culture that happens even within the platform.
Yeah, that's how I came across you. At this point. Yeah, I came across your channel. It's very, very interesting stuff. There's a lot of I would say very acidic, very callous, very inflammatory ex-Mormon TikToks, and you're like the nicest ex-Mormon TikToker of all time. So that's really caught my attention. Can we play one of your TikToks here? And let's can we play one of these for everybody?
Sure, yeah.
And, okay, yeah. Let's pick this one. Here we go.
No one else can do what a righteous woman can do. No one can duplicate the influence of a mother. Men can and often do communicate the love of Heavenly Father and the Savior to others. But women have a special gift for it, a divine endowment. You have the capacity to sense what someone needs and when they need it. You can reach out, comfort, teach, and strengthen someone in his or her very moment of need. Women see things differently than men do. And oh, how we need your perspective. Your nature leads you to think of others first, to consider the effect that any course of action will have on others. My dear sisters, we need you. We need your strength, your conversion, your conviction, your ability to lead, your wisdom, and your voices. We simply cannot gather Israel without you.
Okay, so what's the point behind that TikTok there?
I had made an almost identical video 6 months ago with April's conference, where there were only 2 women speakers, and I created it just to highlight the difference between, I guess, words versus actions. The phrase is actions speak louder than words, and this is one of those that really goes to show that there are disparities within the church that sometimes church leaders don't like to own up to or face, where he will say that we value women and their voices and we need you, and yet he doesn't show that very much in who he invites to speak in general conference. And I think that's one thing that church leaders could listen to people and make some valuable changes without changing any doctrine or anything. That's one small thing that I wanted to highlight, that to just be a voice of change, to maybe be an influence in some small way.
Yeah, and what I also like about your TikTok channel is the fact that you do a lot of current events on there. You did reactions to all of the general conference, and I think every single one of the sessions, you're up on the latest current events. These are not necessarily long-standing issues. Now, there's definitely a place for delving into history and poring over pioneer diaries. That's personally not what really floats my boat, and I guess, that's kind of the reason that the Mormon News Roundup exists, is because I like to talk contemporary LDS news, and it seems like you stay up on it pretty well. Why are you staying up on it so well? Why are you reacting to it? Why is it that you're staying in this space if you said you're not really going to church much anymore?
Well, I not only live in Utah, but also I just have so many friends and family who are still, active, believing in the church. So even if I were to completely step away, they say, if you're going to leave the church, leave it alone. It doesn't leave me alone as far as like my daily life. And so I appreciate being in the know as far as what's happening and what my parents and siblings are told at general conference about people who leave the church. And so I'd like to share those things with others. So like I was saying a minute ago, I liked to share the things that I learned in my nerdy research. I also like to share the things that are currently happening that you might not know if you're not subscribed to, say, Salt Lake Tribune.
Yeah. Well, that's great. And we're going to link to your TikTok channel in the show notes on Mormon News Roundup. We also have a TikTok channel for those of you TikTokers out there. I think most of my followers are bots or Chinese bots. So I think most of yours are real though. So I guess that's the difference between the two of us.
Who knows?
You do have our Mormon News Roundup joke of the week though for us. And we're all ears for this one, Ryan.
All right. I haven't gone through all of the previous episodes to know which jokes have not been told. This one has different answers to it. It's the traditional, how many Mormons does it take to change a light bulb? There are various answers. My favorite is just one to change the light bulb, but 15 to say it's never been changed.
Ah, very nice. It does take 15 to get things done properly, I've heard. So
that's right.
So yeah, you can find this podcast on Apple Podcasts. You can find it on Spotify. If you could leave us a 5-star review, we'd be very grateful for that. We also release all of our episodes onto YouTube, onto Facebook. If you want to find us there, we'd be very grateful for that. Now we're hopping into this week's news here, and right off the bat here, Tim Ballard. He's he's still making a lot of headlines here, Ryan. Here, and this was breaking earlier in the week, back on October 9th. And breaking, Tim Ballard, famous Latter-day Saint, former Latter-day Saint. The rumor is that he had his membership removed a short time ago, but 5 women have sued Tim Ballard and his Operation Underground Railroad, which was supposedly an organization which was supposed to be rescuing children from sexual trafficking and rescuing other needy persons. 5 women have sued him, and other Operation Underground Railroad executives have accused Ballard of sexual assault and battery, and accusing others of fraud, conspiracy to commit sexual assault, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. This Tim Ballard mess, it is unraveling here, Ryan. What are your initial thoughts? I know that you follow this stuff. What's your initial thoughts on what's happening this week with Tim Ballard?
Well, this is an interesting one for me to follow because I actually went to his first film at least in Utah theaters. I think it was just in Utah. He had a couple before this major blockbuster film that just happened a few months ago. And the first was either in 2017 or 18. And my wife and I went to it in the theater, fully supporting and excited about what he was doing. But I remember even back then people talking about, questioning his methods and whether they were effective. And at the time I was, in full support and backing him up. But now, years later, as more and more comes out, there are things that are starting to make sense in my mind. Looking back, putting the pieces together, less and less is surprising that as these things come out now, these women are accusing him of misconduct that makes sense in a way that makes a lot of people uncomfortable, and a lot of people would rather either deny or just hope against all hope that it's not true, essentially. So it's not all too surprising, unfortunately.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's all too. We've seen these type of situations in the past, and it seems it's an absolute mess here. I found a news article here that I wanted to play that basically summarizes, in case for those people who haven't been following this news very carefully. If this is your first time watching the Mormon News Roundup, we're going to catch you up to speed. I found a Fox 13 news summary about 3 minutes long, which is going to bring everybody here up to date on women filing a lawsuit against Tim Ballard claiming sexual assault and battery.
Top story tonight, new insight into the ongoing story involving Tim Ballard and the nonprofit he founded, Operation Underground Railroad.
We've learned that both Ballard and Operation Underground Railroad and others are now being sued in a Utah court. It's a story Fox 13 News investigative team has been following for 3 years now. But it wasn't until about a month ago that new allegations of sexual harassment came out against Tim Ballard.
Then, just a few weeks ago, an attorney for the woman accusing Ballard spoke publicly alleging sexual assault and fraud by the man who was supposed to be rescuing people from human trafficking. Tonight, Fox 13 News has its hands on that complaint, and we've been combing through its dozens of pages.
As Fox 13 News investigative reporter Nate Carlisle explains, the women suing Tim Ballard and OUR contend those trips they took with him overseas were not what they appeared to be.
This is a photo of talk show host Glenn Beck with M. Russell Ballard of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and Operation Underground Railroad founder Tim Ballard. The two Ballards are not related, and Tim Ballard is the only man in this photograph named as a defendant in the lawsuit. Among the plaintiff's claims, Tim Ballard used the Mormon faith to manipulate people.
I'm the bad guy in the story. I'm the bad guy in the story that rescued over 7,000 women and children.
Tim Ballard has denied any wrongdoing. Neither he nor representatives of Operation Underground Railroad, or OUR, returned messages seeking comment Monday. The 5 women say they are Utah residents who worked with or for OUR. The rescue operations typically involve first-class travel for OUR personnel, the lawsuit says, and in strip clubs and massage parlors, Ballard sometimes drank alcohol until he passed out.
Our involvement with Operation Underground Railroad was rooted in our commitment to fighting against human trafficking. But while engaging in that noble cause, we were subjected to sexual harassment, spiritual manipulation, grooming, and sexual misconduct.
The suit described the couple's ruse, where Ballard and a woman he selected would go undercover. The women say the ruse became a means for sexual grooming, that Ballard would share a bed or shower with them. The women described unwanted touching and coerced sex acts. One paragraph in the suit says, Ballard would insist that the women stay silent about their alleged sexual encounters with him because if they told anyone, it would put everyone's lives at risk. On the ops mission, it was necessary to save the trafficked children, and because he was blessed by President Ballard to be future president of the United States and then the prophet of the Mormon Church.
The behavior of Tim Ballard crossed the line, and these women cannot remain silent.
The plaintiffs say OUR and its board learned of Ballard's behavior, but it stayed silent in order to make money earlier this year from the film The Sound of Freedom, which dramatizes Ballard and the rescue missions. The 5 plaintiffs are asking for damages to be proven at trial. Their attorneys are planning a news conference for Wednesday. In the studio.
Yeah, so, what an absolute mess here. Not only is his organization, these are all allegations. Supposedly, he wasn't rescuing children. Some of the missions that we know were complete busts. It appears to be enriching himself. That's the allegation. He's got sexual battery. It's getting worse and worse for Tim Ballard every single week. It seems like another shoe is dropping, and there's serious LDS connections all the way to the top, to the acting president of the 12. This is a complete and utter debacle, Ryan.
Yeah, it's. I feel so awful for the victims involved. At the same time, it's. I don't know if entertaining is the right word, as I keep hearing more and more things come out. Because if you learn about abuse and manipulation, and the word of the last decade has been gaslighting, that everyone has kind of learned that side of abuse. Those who engage in abuse and gaslighting, manipulation, when they are caught at this, it's a well-known pattern that they will deny until they're forced into a corner and know that there's no backing out, and then they'll let out just as little as possible. And at first it was like, no, I did not engage in any of this. And then, oh no, I guess we did shower together. But it was the couple's ruse. It's just one little detail at a time.
Yeah, and the same from the church's statements. It seemed like the church at the beginning is saying, oh, okay, there's nothing happening. They didn't know each other. Then, okay, maybe they did have an association, but Elder Ballard, he never gave him anything. There was no endorsement. We keep getting, the onion keeps getting peeled back here, and it keeps getting more disgusting every time we take a sniff. And this isn't just a regional, Ryan, as you well know, this isn't just a regional news article here. It's making it's going across the Washington Post is picking up, for instance, Tim Ballard of Sound of Freedom fame, accused of sexual misconduct. I mean, this started pretty small with Vice News, and the clip that we just watched was from Utah Regional Fox 13 affiliates. Those are somewhat small or somewhat fringe media outlets. This is going global here with Washington Post and others, and the reason is because we had the Sound of Freedom, which was a big blockbuster hit in the summer.
Yeah,
so
a
now
surprising blockbuster hit. I was surprised at how big it went, and everybody knows about it now as a result.
Yeah, everybody knows. That's the crazy thing, is that everybody knows about it now, and so the cat's out of the bag. There's a couple of other ones that I want to share with you here, and this is the Blaze Media. We saw a picture of Glenn Beck. That was a really good 3-minute news summary, by the way, the best one I could find this week. Glenn Beck from who is an active member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, report that Tim Ballard used the same justification to get women to engage in sexual acts that Joseph Smith used. This is a common theme from the women who spoke with Blaze News, is that Ballard would use spiritual manipulation to coerce them into sexual activities. Most, if not all, of the women who spoke with Blaze News have had some affiliation with the LDS Church at some point in their lives, and in many cases, Ballard would cite for them passages from the Book of Mormon in which a man kills another man at the promptings of the Holy Spirit. According to multiple women, the purpose of this reference was to demonstrate that sometimes the Holy Spirit asks people to perform, quote, unconventional tasks, presumably such as engaging in extramarital sexual contact. So we've seen these type of things happen over and over again, and it really chills my blood.
Yeah, that's problematic. Citing scripture in the first place is problematic, but citing that scripture especially, you can justify anything using that justification. In that case, it was murder in the Book of Mormon, but it was okay because it's better for one man to perish than for a whole nation to dwindle and perish in unbelief. And it's okay if we drink some alcohol and do some inappropriate this and that because it's for a greater purpose. And plus, we're going to make money off of Blockbuster.
Well, it also reminds me of Joseph Smith and Nancy Rigdon. That which is condemned in one circumstance may be appropriate in another. That was the same type of grooming techniques that Joseph Smith used with Nancy Rigdon, who was very young as well. Which brings me up to this next meme, which I wanted to share. We have a button here. Tim Ballard's coercive tactics to sexually manipulate women were gross, and he should be in jail. Or you want to push the button that says Joseph Smith's coercive tactics to manipulate teenagers to marry him weren't bad because it was a different time. And this is a kind of a tough button to push for Latter-day Saints because there seems to be a lot of similarities here, Ryan, between what Tim Ballard is claiming and what Joseph Smith did.
You know, this isn't the first time we've seen this either. There's the meme that I've seen quite a few times with the image of Warren Jeffs in one corner and Joseph Smith in the other. Well, let's see. No, maybe it's just Warren Jeffs. Anyway, but it says like Warren Jeffs had so many wives by the time he was 37 years old, the youngest being 14 and blah, blah, blah. Oh, wait, no, that was Joseph Smith. Sorry, my bad. I get the two of them mixed up. And so we've seen this before, and here we go again. And this is one of those common themes that you see within the former Mormon community where people have a hard time learning these things. It's hard internally to learn these things when it feels like the church is still trying to hide the fact that this is how it worked back then. And to me, if you can learn these things and be open and honest with your history and still claim to believe, that's one thing. But doing that with this current news event with Tim Ballard, I don't know. There's no justifying it in my mind. I don't know how people are still continuing to support Tim Ballard throughout all this, and yet there are some.
Yeah, there seems to be a lot of people because I think really what it comes down to is the fact that, you know, and Lynn Packer's reporting on Mormonism Live in his YouTube channel this week really pointed this out, is that there was deep connection between senior LDS leadership and Tim Ballard. And if you say that Tim Ballard is in the wrong, that these accusations are correct, and that he was a morally reprehensible person, and that he engaged in a fraud, and that he was sexually grooming people, and that he was a horrible, depraved individual whose entire life is built on a sham, if you say that on the one hand, the problem is that he was touted in Deseret Book, he was touted in BYU devotionals, and Lynn Packer's reporting shows a close connection between him and senior leaders of the church. And it begs the question, well, how in the world is the church explicitly, in some cases, endorsing a person with such reprehensible morals? If you keep Tim Ballard on a pedestal, then you can keep the church leadership on a pedestal at the same time, and there's no problem. That's how I see people trying to justify something that, if you were to look at any other religion or any other circumstance, you would say, this seems to be, every indication here seems to indicate somebody who really needs a lot of help and is lucky that he is breathing the fresh air and not behind bars.
Well, we want to justify things that we're more related to in order for it's an internal mechanism so that we don't go crazy. And so many people have invested so much emotional time and energy into Tim Ballard and OUR that now to have to go complete opposite to, flip a Yui all of a sudden in their head, that is really hard mentally and emotionally, because it makes you feel like you're going crazy. You've been wrong this whole time. And the brain doesn't like that. And so I'm seeing that a lot on social media as people are starting to grapple with the fact that we were led along for so long with Tim Ballard, and now there's no going back. And we're just going deeper and deeper into this hole of his.
Yeah, I mean, the world wants. I mean, I want Tim Ballard to be a hero. I want people to rescue children. Who wants children to be sexually trafficked? You know, and he was supposed to be a shining example of what a great Latter-day Saint can be. I applaud that. You know, there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, that's very laudable. You know, we should have great examples. We should have heroes.
That's why he had such a blockbuster hit, because who doesn't want that?
Everybody does. But the problem is we got the second lawsuit here. That it's not just one lawsuit. This isn't just a couple of disgruntled employees here. The second lawsuit also broke this week here, Ryan, has been filed against Tim Ballard, Our Rescue, its board, and also the other organization. Tim Ballard, he no longer works at OUR, but he started a new organization called the Spear Fund, which supposedly does about the same thing. That has been named in a lawsuit, and the suit is from a couple. The wife alleges sexual assault and fraud, and the husband claims that he separated from his wife because of the wedge that Ballard created, and claims that the husband was threatened. I mean, this is a disaster. And I don't know if am I bad because I enjoy watching this? I mean, I don't enjoy the human carnage, but I don't know. Maybe I'm sick and demented, because I am going to be watching this very carefully. I want to see how it all plays out.
Demented, I'm demented there with you, because, like I was saying a minute ago, that is entertaining the right word, because it's kind of entertaining to see him dig his own hole. Well, I guess he's already dug his own grave. We're just finally uncovering this grave and how deep it gets, and it just keeps getting deeper. If I learned anything from the Me Too movement, it's that we need to believe the victims, and there are just more and more victims who are speaking out against him.
I mean, everybody is speaking out against him. For those listeners out there, we drop these episodes onto YouTube live every Sunday night at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Can you leave us a comment? What do you think about this Tim Ballard? Are people obsessed with this for no good reason, including myself? Do we need to move along? Do we need to let justice run its course? Is it a morbid fascination? What are your thoughts on Tim Ballard? Should we continue to cover that with the Mormon News Roundup? We'd really like to know. Now, our next article here, Ryan, because we cover all the news, we could spend a lot of time. There's a lot of podcasts and a lot of shows that have spent a lot of time on this. We could spend a lot of time. We just don't have it. But this next article is very, very interesting, because, you know, we just had General Conference that happened a couple of weeks ago, and the fallout and the memes and things, they keep coming out. And this is one clip that actually happened just before conference with Elder Bednar here. He was at the Silicon Slopes Summit, and he made this incredible claim about General Conference and the amount of people who actually watch it. I want to cue this up for you, and let's hear how many people the Elder Bednar thinks actually watch General Conference.
We're going into conference this weekend. We just launched a streaming service and are just trying to get it to Utah and Idaho. I can't imagine the scope of the streaming and the technology that you have. Can you give everyone a view into the scope and reach of what's about to take place this week?
Yeah. General Conference goes to hundreds of millions of people all over the earth. Over the past number of years, we've been very successful on every continent of having General Conference broadcast through local media systems. So you'll have in Sao Paulo, Brazil, they'll have 2 or 3 sessions of conference on local TV stations. And increasingly, this happens all over the world. So hundreds of millions of people see conference.
Hundreds of millions of people are watching General Conference. That's more than I thought was going to be the number.
Huge congratulations to them. He didn't just say, I didn't realize he'd said it twice. I didn't listen to that clip closely enough the first time. Apparently he is confident with that number. So huge congratulations for hundreds of millions of people. You know, I thought 17 million was a stretch, you know?
Okay, this just really reminds me of the Trump inauguration, where you had he said that it was the largest inauguration of all time. But when you compared the photos between Obama's inauguration, which the National Mall was absolutely packed, you couldn't find a hotel room in Washington, D.C., which is where I live. And then you compare the pictures with Donald Trump's inauguration, it wasn't the biggest one. It seems like we're boasting about something, and I just don't know why. Why do we always feel the need to inflate everything? Why do we have to? It has to be hundreds of millions of people watching conference. Why can't we just, say, hey, this was really great for the 4 million or so active Latter-day Saints, and actually only about maybe 2 million of them actually watched it. Why can't we just be honest? Why do we have to exaggerate?
I wonder if it has something to do with the event itself. What he is there for isn't it for businesses? Weren't there CEOs
tech and businesses?
Yeah. And I feel like, I wonder if he's justifying his presence there in the first place. I almost made a video for my channel when I heard that he was going to be there. Just scrolling through the names of everyone who is at that conference, CEO of this company and the president of that company, and they're all these multi-billion-dollar companies, not all of them, but a lot of them. And then David Bednar of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, they've been trying to distance themselves from the money aspect because of the hundreds of billions of dollars that everyone's been talking about the last year or two. And yet here he is at a business conference talking about money and how they're successful with their money. So I feel like he has to be successful and talk up the numbers in order to justify being there as a representative for a church.
Maybe so. Now, we had Evan from the Book of Evan on the podcast before, back on a previous episode. He always has a lot of good tweets out there. He's one of the most underrated Twitter accounts out here. But he said, hey, you're obviously only counting the mortal realm. Hundreds of millions on the other side of the veil is a low estimate. Ryan, billions of our ancestors are actually watching conference every single day.
That has to be what he's talking about. Hundreds of billions of people who are just waiting for you to baptize them in the temple.
Yeah, they're glued to that general conference. And Chino Blanco, who also follows the news here, he's actually the one who tweeted this out. He says, David A. Bednar brings his special math to the Silicon Slope Summit. Hundreds of millions of people see conference when it takes place. Cool story, bro.
Cool story, bro. Yeah,
I think that pretty much sums it up for me. But I actually did a tiny bit of research about the hundreds of millions of number here. And if you look, I looked up on Google here for the most for the events that actually have the most amount of people in human history. The number one event for the most amount of people watching was actually the Apollo 11 moon landing with maybe around 125 to 150 million. Then you have a couple of Super Bowls in there at around 110 million, and Richard Nixon's resignation speech at like 110 million. So general conference, it should be above all. This should be right. Most of this should be general conference. It seems like based on
apparently.
Yeah, I don't know.
I see people going out to buy their big screen TV for the Super Bowl. I didn't realize people were doing that for general conference too.
Yeah, I think it could be Wikipedia religious persecution that the numbers are deflated. But I did. It could be. People give me a lot of comments in the comment section. They say there's too much sarcasm in this podcast, but I can't help it. But I actually looked this up, Ryan. Look, I looked up at President Nelson's famous Think Celestial talk, which I know you covered on your channel here. And, you haven't looked at it yet, but give me a guess here, Ryan. I'm putting you on the spot. About how many people do you think, this was about 2 weeks ago, how many people do you think have watched the Think Celestial talk that President Nelson gave?
You mean like this video on YouTube or total including TV?
This is the church's official channel on General Conference. If you want to find this talk, I think the vast majority of people would come to the church's official channel, and this is the most watched out of all of the talks. How many people do you think have watched it in the last 2 weeks?
I would venture to guess 300,000 views.
Oh my gosh, you are so smart. It's 212,000 people. Very good.
Okay.
Yeah, not exactly the hundreds of millions that we were hoping for there. Not exactly the hundreds of millions, but I looked at this as well. President Nelson's most viewed talk of all time was the one that he gave. It was an Easter message that he gave back in 2019. I can't remember the exact exact year. It was called Forgiving Others, an Easter Message from President Russell M. Nelson. This is his most viewed clip. It was 5 minutes long, and it has an astonishing 22 million people have watched this clip, which is pretty good. That's
yeah, not bad.
That's not bad, except for there's just one small caveat here, Ryan, and that's that Mormon Stories did an episode about how the church very much likely bought those views by investing millions of dollars into AdSense campaigns and Google and the YouTube campaign to punch this thing up in the algorithm. So yes, you can get to hundreds of millions, David Bednar. It's just going to cost you a couple of $1 million to do it, but wouldn't put it past the church to do it at all.
Yeah, that makes sense. Just for my little bit of background with creating content with TikTok, you can get those views even if it doesn't naturally go viral. You can pay it to go viral, and TikTok is always trying to convince you to pay them to show more people. I can see the church finding ways to do that in order to to justify getting their message out there, but really just to get more views.
Yep, but to just get more views. Naturally, so church official content in its lifespan will get a couple 100,000 views, just like you saw. The Think Celestial is at like 200,000. It's not going to go that much more up because, as we know, Prophets Council, it's not like comic books. It doesn't gain value over time. So those views are not going to go up very much. But if you want to get those 20 million views, you can pay for it. You can just tap a little bit of those tithing funds. And people wonder what tithing goes for. I don't think that they realize that maybe some of it's going for Chinese bot views on YouTube. You know what I mean?
Yep. You remind me that this Think Celestial talk, a lot of people have been upset about, but we might not have to be upset about it for very much longer because we only listen to living prophets, and he's very soon here not going to be a living prophet because he's nearing a century old and he's showing signs of age. I wonder how long we'll still have Russell with us.
That does make me wonder if, for instance, how long he will be around. Will he make the 100th birthday and have a big celebration? I certainly hope so for his sake. But it does remind me, how many temples that he's announced over time. This is his big legacy project, is that he's announced, I think it's 160 temples out of the 330 that have been announced. He's responsible for almost half of the temples. And he won't be around probably to see all of them to completion, because it usually takes between 3 and 5 years from the announcement of a temple until the ground is broken on it, which does remind me, Ryan, of, he announced back in April, one of his first temples. He was very happy to announce back in April 1st, 2018. This was his very first general conference. He announced the temple in Russia while speaking over the pulpit. And guess what? 5.5 years later, no city has been selected. No renderings are available. No ground has been broken. I bet this never gets built. So much for prophecy. What do you think?
Well, I was really excited back then. I was totally all in when that was announced 5.5 years ago. I remember how exciting that was to have a temple announced in Russia. So now 5.5 years later to have no progress. I'm sure a lot of people are disappointed. This is not actually the first time this has happened. Not only counting temples that were prophesied about, like in the Doctrine and Covenants, that like Adamant Island type of places that were never built, but there were modern temples as well that this has happened before. There was one in New York. It's now the Manhattan temples area, but there was a temple that was announced in 1998, I want to say, that the people in the area put up a huge fight and said, we don't want this temple here. And ultimately the church caved, and there is still no temple there.
Well, they are refurbishing what they did in Manhattan is that they took a stake center essentially in Manhattan. They converted it into a temple.
Yeah, that's what ended up happening because of this other area. I forget the name of that, Harrisburg. I think it's Harrisburg in New York that they announced that still doesn't exist. So instead, the people in that area go to the Manhattan temple that ended up being refurbished / built instead.
Yeah, and that Manhattan temple is now has been announced to be undergoing refurbishment as well. So the church is not only doing a esoteric global building spree of these temples, announcing 20 in the last conference, which is probably somewhere in the neighborhood of $1 billion in temples. But in just the last conference alone, but is also in the refurbishing of temples, including the Salt Lake Temple, including recently the St. George Temple, including the Manhattan Temple, many temples, including the Washington, D.C. Temple, which was the church's longest refurbishment of a temple ever, by the way, was Washington, D.C. It took them 4 years to refurbish them. So the amount of money that is being spent not only in new temple construction, but in temple maintenance and in refurbishment is very, very significant. And as you mentioned, some of these temples, like in Urda, Nevada, that was a temple that never got built. The temple that you're referencing, I've got to look that one up. But we also have the Shanghai Temple in China. That's nowhere near completion. So this legacy piece for President Nelson of building all of these temples and spending all of this money, it's not quite panning out the way that I think that he wanted. Any last thoughts on these temples here, Ryan?
Well, I was just surprised at the sheer number of temples. This was the second highest number of announced temples in General Conference. And considering how much money each temple costs to build, each temple costs somewhere in the neighborhood of $20 to $70 million per temple. Might start to go down a little bit as they're starting to use these, whatever it's called, building block temples, where it's built
prefabricated.
Prefabricated temples. But there was the disaster in Maui with the fires there, and the church gave money to Maui, a whole $1 million. And yet they just announced 20 temples, each of which might cost $40 million to build one temple. And they just goes to show where their heart is, where your money is, your heart is.
Right. And in Maui, I think it was 5 Latter-day Saints who died in those horrible wildfires, and many others lost homes. But what did the church do to in that situation? Not only did President Nelson not go to minister himself, not only did any member of the Quorum 15 go, really no senior leader of the church went. They sent, I believe, the area authority, which was from California, one person out, and the saints are in significant suffering. And what did they get? 1 million. Anybody who's been to Hawaii, that you can't even build one house for $1 million. The saints there needed significant support and help. And what did they get? They got a second temple to be announced in Hawaii. I think that's the second temple that's being announced in Hawaii.
On the island of Maui. Yeah.
Right. Instead of rebuilding homes for people who are, some of them are still homeless, some of them are still suffering. Instead, we're getting another temple in Hawaii when there's one that is quite close nearby. So like you said, the priorities of the church are revealed by the amount of money that is spent.
Where they spend their money.
Yeah. Just like Jesus said on the Sermon on the Mount, that there where your heart is, there will your treasure be also. A couple of other news articles that we looked at this week, and this was an interesting one here that dropped on the Salt Lake Tribune here, Ryan. It says, Natalie Brown, neurodiversity may explain why Latter-day Saints experience church policies, practices, and preachings in various ways. It could explain, for instance, why some women see the faith as sexist and some other women don't. What was this article? Can you bring us up to speed on this article? What is this article telling us here, Ryan?
Well, I thought this article was interesting in the word neurodiversity. They're not talking necessarily about diagnoses like ADHD or anything like that, just referencing the fact that everyone is different. Everyone's brain functions and thinks and reacts differently. And yet within the church, we have a prescribed way of living. There are all these commandments that the more closely you are in line with these prescribed commandments and these prescribed programs, then the more righteous you are perceived. There's even the temple recommend that correlates with that. And yet some people function better with rules. Some people function better with more fluidity. Everyone is a little different, and yet there is no flexibility within the church, within how people are expected to live. Even like within the missionary program, missionaries are sent out to convince people not only to get baptized, but then, hey, the men go to church in white shirts. Doesn't matter what your local culture is here. We go to church in a white shirt and tie, that type of thing. We need to very much stay in line, and that just doesn't work well for some people. So I appreciated that article bringing to light the fact that we do need more flexibility, more compassion for others who are not like us.
Yeah, if there's anything in your TikTok channel that you are a champion of, it's compassion towards other people. And I think that's why you're extremely authentic and very, very approachable. And that's obviously the reason that you have the following that you do. And I think that this article also really highlights, if you watch like Patrick Mason, an apologist, I know he doesn't like that term, but he talks about how the church works really well for people like him, meaning that, he's white, he's cisgender, he's married, he's, a Utah guy. And what this article points out is that, there's a lot of neurodiversity out there. The way that people respond, especially to prescribed rules and commandments and fiats, and in situations in which they have no true common consent, it varies greatly. And the rules that surround people's lives, it's a very complicated thing, and people have a variety of approaches to it. And the problem here is that the church is it's a one size fits all organization. Meaning this is supposed to be the plan of salvation. It's supposed to work for everyone on the planet. But the problem is that people's neural makeups and the way that they respond to things is very much different. And the church has a very challenging time really trying to, kind of have I'm an educator, so I should know this, be able to have a diversity of approach with people,
Yeah. There was actually, we were talking about General Conference a few minutes ago. There was actually a General Conference talk that touched on this in the Saturday evening session. There were only 4 talks, but the third of the 4 was Tamara Runia. And if you want to listen to a General Conference talk that is truly inspiring, it is hers. As she even says at one point regarding someone who's going through a hard time in a way that you might not understand. She touches on empathy and says, encourages you to think, how would I have to feel in order to say what they just said? And so there are people within the church, even in the upper ranks of the church. She's not an apostle and can never be an apostle. But it is out there with people who do understand that there is a huge amount of neurodiversity, and we do have a huge need of compassion, of reaching out, of understanding people who are different than us. I think that's one thing that the church could really make huge strides in if we were to capitalize on her message.
Yeah, and President Nelson's final address from General Conference, the think celestial and never take advice from those who don't believe, that definitely goes the opposite direction. And what was interesting, Ryan, is that this week I was listening to This Week in Mormons, which is another LDS contemporary news podcast. And I like to listen to all of them out there. And they actually talked about that address. And they said, you know what? Maybe in General Conference, maybe we need to have some licensed therapists or some psychologists check the General Conference addresses so that we're not doing any harm to people in General Conference, because this is Week in Mormons, by the way. They're saying these old guys, they don't know the harm that they're doing when they're talking about never take counsel from non-believers or some of the other things. They would just be nice if, instead of General Conference talks going through correlation, what if they also went through licensed therapists so that people are not inflicting harm upon others?
Oh, I think that can make a huge difference. That's not the church's priority, but that could make a huge difference for so many people. As President Nelson talked about think celestial, and he even gave so many examples of when you get an injury like mine, think celestial. When someone else is going through a hard time, think celestial. And instead, if we were to actually, I saw this TikTok where someone suggested if he had changed his message to think compassion, what difference would that make in someone's life?
Yeah. Think celestial when you're hoarding $300 billion. Oh no, that's not thinking celestial. Yeah. We went through our Mormon joke, our Mormon poll of the week last week. We went through all of the ridiculous ways in which you could think celestial. And I thought we did a pretty good job with that poll. You can go back.
I appreciated that. Yeah. That was a pretty good poll.
Yeah, it was. I like that poll. Unfortunately, we didn't get a poll this week, but yeah, I do like their Mormon joke. our Mormon polls of the week. A couple of other articles here to get through here. We try to get these through in about an hour-long show here. James Huntsman, once again, he's back in the news. He's not letting go on the LDS Church, why he left suited and what he hopes to change in it. This was a really interesting look behind the scenes because, for the first couple of years of James Huntsman's lawsuit in his attempt to try to get his tithing back, he was completely silent. He gave no interviews to the media. He didn't do anything, but now he's done recent interviews with the United Kingdom's Daily Mail. He did the Washington Post, and now he's doing a question and answer with the Salt Lake Tribune regarding his motivations. And I thought that this was a very revealing article. What did anything surprise you about this article and reading through James Huntsman?
Well, the biggest thing that surprised me was actually regarding why he was so quiet about it, and now he's not. He claims in his interview there that he did not want to go public. He did not want there to be a lawsuit. He wrote to the church multiple times requesting and then demanding his tithing back. And in these back and forth between him and the church, as the church was refusing, and he kept saying, no, but yeah, you really should. The church reached out to a family member of his, he doesn't say who, in order to pressure him to let it go. He wasn't telling anybody. He points out that his family has a great reputation for great reasons. There's the Huntsman Cancer Institute that has used probably billions of dollars at this point to do so much good for so many people, and he doesn't want to ruin that legacy in any way, shape, or form. And yet the church didn't so much care about that. They reached out to his family member who, from my understanding from this article, didn't know about it, didn't know what was going on, but they so much didn't care as much as they cared about not giving back their money that he gave them.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, is that James Huntsman and his family, they are well off. There's absolutely no doubt about that. And they have a modest, they've done a huge amount of good, both within the state of Utah and without, using their significant resources. They've given so much of it away. And I think that really gives James Huntsman's, he's very conflicted about it from the article, but it really gives him a better leg to stand on because his family and their generosity is well known. They've given away a lot of their wealth. And he brings that up. And he said, if my foundation had the same kind of resources that the church had, we could do so much more. Yeah. And that's another one of his issues with the church, is the fact that, the church is giving away, as we mentioned, just a couple of $1 million per year, which is a lot more than I've given away. Or this last year, they gave away $200 million, which is the most that they've ever done. That's a significant amount of giving. But James Huntsman points out that there is so much more that could be given. And, he felt betrayed. He wanted to keep it a secret. He felt specifically that his tithing, he said, he thought that it was going to be used for humanitarian purposes. Humanitarian purposes are very important to James Huntsman. And when he gave his money to the church under the auspices that it would be used for humanitarian purposes and that it would not be used for commercial ventures such as the building of City Creek Mall, then when he found out that it was used for the essentially it was used for City Creek Mall by a commercial venture, $1.4 billion. Some of that was his money, and he paid significant amount of money to the church, millions of dollars. I think it was $5 million. When he found out that his money, far from being used for humanitarian purposes, was being used for commercial purposes, and also he found out later, after he filed the lawsuit, that it was being used to just go into a hedge fund to provide stock dividends to rich egg-headed Wall Street executives. That really burned his, that really galled him a lot.
Yeah, it makes sense with his family legacy, which, they made millions, they made a fortune and then used it for great purposes. And the church here is making a fortune as well. And they could have at best used it for charity and at worst used it for, say, building a temple to build God's kingdom. And instead they built them all with it. And so I can totally understand how upsetting that would be to someone like James Huntsman, who gave a lot of money expecting it to be used for good things. And it wasn't just assumed to be used for good things. There was Gordon B. Hinckley saying over the pulpit that we are not going to use your tithing money to build this mall. And then come to find out, that's exactly what they did.
Yeah, and other statements. That was, you're referencing his President Hinckley's 2003 statement where he said that it would that no tithing has been or would be used for tithing. Instead, it would be coming from invested reserves. Well, invested reserves and tithing are the exact same thing. I'm sorry, they are. Okay, so that's the problem.
Yeah, I think that's a funny justification when it's not tithing. It's tithing that we invested and we made it grow bigger, and then we use that instead.
Right.
Is that really different? And that's the whole court case. That is what this, if it actually goes to court, that is the question that has to be decided. Is that tithing, or is it no longer tithing because they made it grow bigger first?
Right. And that's what the circuit court has already, the 3-panel judges, 2 out of the 3 of them said that a reasonable juror could conclude that invested reserves and tithing are ostensibly the same thing. A reasonable person, we don't make a differentiation. If I put my money in my savings account, I put $100 in, and then later on I take out, 5 years later, I take out $3 of it, but I say, okay, this wasn't from the initial nest egg, so it has nothing to do with the initial nest egg. Most people say, no, it's all the same thing. You made $3 in interest. It's all from the initial nest egg. That's what the circuit court has said. So the one other thing I just wanted to highlight is, for the first time also from James Huntsman, what we get from him is his reasons for leaving the church, which up until this point he has not said. And he said that his reason for leaving the church was the active, what did he say here? The major issue I want to flag, he said, is the LDS church's continued embrace an active doctrine of polygamy. So he said that even though that the church has abandoned conducting civil marriages and polygamous civil marriages, even in countries or places in which they are legally allowed to have polygamy, even though the church does not engage in that practice any longer, it's still on the books in heaven. And that concept to him was appalling. And that was the thing that led to his, directly led to his faith erosion and eventually leaving the church. Any last thoughts on James Huntsman and the lawsuit here, Ryan?
No, I've just enjoyed learning about polygamy myself, and there's a lot of pain in the history of polygamy and currently in those who fear heaven, because heaven is supposed to be filled with polygamists. Essentially, that is the doctrine. That is still the doctrine, and it's really scary. It's a real fear for a lot of people, and so that. I totally understood and related to that when I saw that that was a major point in him leaving the church, or in losing belief in the church. That kind of makes sense, because that's a difficult doctrine to swallow.
Yeah, it still is a stumbling block for people not only leaving the church, but people joining the church altogether. It's still out there, because we've covered in the Mormon News Roundup that almost 35% of Americans think that Mormons still practice polygamy. When they hear Mormon, they think polygamy. So if you have 35% of people who think that you're marrying multiple wives, that's a serious problem in our modern day society. And as we covered before, the church, it doesn't really want to get into the polygamy. It wants to forget about it. It doesn't want to bring it up. It doesn't want to try to see, if you have a brand problem, the church really has a brand problem when it comes to polygamy. They need to, very much disassociate themselves with polygamy, so that modern day Americans, only 50,000 people in the United States joined the church in the last 2 years. 2 years. That is absolutely a drop in a bucket. So the church needs to change its brand and say that polygamy, like President Hinckley said, is not doctrinal, and we don't do it, and we disavow it, and we don't have anything to do with it. But they can't do that because it's still on the celestial books. That's the entire problem with the James Huntsman face and so many other people face.
Yeah. And there was one more thing regarding his case that I realized I wanted to point out, that the church is trying to make this case into a freedom of religion case. James Huntsman pointed out, it was maybe a week or two ago now, that 4 judges now have made rulings about this case, and while 2 of the 4 think that it should go to court to be decided by a jury, 4 out of 4 have voiced that this has nothing to do with freedom of religion. It is simply a case of fraud.
Exactly. So I mean, that's the entire point. The church could have kept their mouths silent on the City Creek Mall. They could have said nothing, and James Huntsman would not have a leg to stand on, nor would anybody else have a leg to stand on.
Yeah.
What the church does with your
Mhm.
tithing, they can do almost anything with tithing donations, almost anything, including enriching the senior leaders of the church. When you give to a church, that pastor can buy a car with it. He can fly to Maui with it. There's almost nothing that a religion can't do with donations. The only thing that a religion can't do with donations is say, we're not going to do something and then do it. That's the problem. That's the fraud. It has nothing to do with the religion. It has everything to do with fraud.
Yep. So it'll be really interesting to see how this case unfolds. What I have seen pointed out is if it makes it to court, then that is the ultimate goal of so many people, because then the church will be forced to open up their books in order to prove their point. And that's what the church is trying to prevent, is to not have to open up their books. They don't want to reveal the man behind the curtain. We'll see what happens.
Absolutely not. And that, the church in the discovery phase, in the initial district court, in the discovery phase, which is where people are supposed to lay open their books, the church very much said that we don't want to lay our books open because that would do undue harm to the church. And what was the reason why? They said it because it would subject the church's finances to outside scrutiny. The church doesn't want to be accountable to its members. It doesn't want to be accountable to the government with the SEC. The church doesn't want to be accountable to anyone for anything. That's the most important.
Fascinating to me when they were just fined. I mean, it's been a few months ago now. They were fined $5 million for lying, and it's not just unethical, but illegal activity with hiding their money. And yet still we have this case where they're saying, oh, no, we don't want to open up their books, our books, because it'll do harm to the church. Will it really, though? Is that really the reason?
We'll wait and see. So the church, the circuit court said the two out of the 3 judge panel of the circuit court said send it back down to the district. The church said time out. We want you to appeal, and we want to appeal that, and we want you to take another look at it. So this is going to take a lot more time. Yeah. We'll be watching it here at the Mormon News Roundup. A couple last articles here to round it out here. This was a fascinating look here. This was a new poll that was put out here from KUER 90.1, and this was published on October 9th, 2023. Only 10% of Latter-day Saints see climate change as a crisis, survey finds. So if you look at the percentage who say that climate change is a crisis, what do you notice here, Ryan, between, it compares Jews, Catholics, white Catholics, mainline Protestant, white evangelicals, all Americans. What do you notice about how do Latter-day Saints stack up when it says the percent of those who think that climate change is a crisis?
Well, this is shocking because other groups, there's white Catholic is at 20%. The biggest is Jewish is at, 32%. Latter-day Saints is sitting down there at 10%. There's only one other group that's lower than that, and that's white evangelicals, only 2 points lower at 8%. This was shocking for me to see because of how much Latter-day Saints claim to be like a scientifically led. I remember going to BYU and talking about how God is the ultimate scientist. So it doesn't hurt anyone's faith to learn about any science, even evolution, because maybe that's how God created the earth. He's the ultimate scientist. And yet here we are essentially denying science.
Yeah, I mean, that's what the article points out, is that there's not only that, it's that for over half of Latter-day Saints. Let me pull this one up here for you. I'm kind of stumbling here. Percentage of Latter-day Saints who feel a deep spiritual connection with nature. The Latter-day Saints, 73% of them feel a deep spiritual connection with nature, and yet only 10% of them really think that climate change is an issue. And that really got me thinking this week. I was saying, why is there such a disconnect? If Latter-day Saints feel it's so important, and nature is so important, Latter-day Saints are generally well-educated. Why do they feel almost no compunction to deal with climate change at all, see it as a serious issue? There's a huge disconnect here. And I just wonder, what could the reason be between that disconnect?
My speculation is, as we've been talking about the church building so many temples, they have been stressing attending the temple in order to justify building so many temples. And when you attend the temple, the main thing that you do over and over and over again is the endowment session, where you watch a film that's like an hour long about Adam and Eve and the creation and how beautiful the earth is and how beautiful these creations are that God has made for us. And so that's where I see this correlation with Latter-day Saints being connected with nature on that aspect, but at the same time, they're looking forward to the second coming. And what precedes the second coming is the earth being purified or burned. And so from a Christian and Latter-day Saint perspective, we don't have any responsibility to take care of the earth because it's going to be burned anyway. And that is so frustrating to me, where I want my children to have healthy air to breathe. And yet it's like my neighbors don't even care about that.
Yeah, it's always like the second coming is just around the corner. And when Jesus comes again, he'll take care of the earth, so we don't need to worry about it. If you live in an apocalyptic mindset, meaning that the end of the world is always right around the corner, then you feel no responsibility to take care of this planet, and therefore climate change would be a low priority. The other issue that I have that maybe can explain that disconnect that we talked about is the fact, think about General Conference, which just took place 2 weeks ago. I think I watched every session. I'm not sure, I might have missed one or two, but did anybody really talk about climate change? Did anyone really talk about, conserving resources or sustainability or anything along those lines, including the presiding bishopric, who their entire job is supposed to be temporal affairs? No, not from my knowledge. And maybe if they did, it was a glancing blow. Certainly less than 1% of General Conference would have been dedicated to anything like this. So that, members of the church get their marching orders, their priorities from the Quorum of the 15. And when the Quorum of the 15 consistently do not address these type of issues that are one of the most existential issues of our time, if they don't address it, then they're getting their priority from there. And they say, well, if it's not a priority for them, then it's not going to be a priority for me either. Yeah, that makes sense. They've been stressing obedience to the commandments and attending the temple, like I said a minute ago. And so the more you attend the temple, the less you're listening to the news of the world and keeping up with what is important to your neighborhood and your community and the world as a whole, because you're focusing more and more on the temple itself, which shuts people away from the world, kind of on purpose to keep them spiritually connected with God, which could be a good thing, except for the fact that then you're not paying attention to anything else that's happening around you. Yeah, that's a good point. And if you look at the way that the church has used its resources, as you said, in building a lot of temples, but also who does the church, when they donate money, who do they donate it to? They donate it to fighting hunger, to UNICEF, to the Red Cross, to UNESCO, those type of things, which are generally for feeding people and housing people and things along those lines. To my knowledge, to my knowledge, I've never seen the church donate to something that would help out with any type of climate refugees, resettling people who's people who live in Kiribati, whose islands are being flooded and they have to be relocated. The church never seems to donate to anything regarding climate change, and that again reveals the church's priorities. If you're a member and the church, they never talk about it. It's not really much on the website at all. They don't give any resources to it. It's not really talked about over the pulpit at the local level because it's, quote, too political, even though it really has nothing to do with politics whatsoever. Then you're going to figure, well, fine, then this isn't a priority for me. There's bigger fish to fry. Yeah, well, I grew up in the 90s, and I remember the conversations about how many people just did not believe that there was a climate crisis, that global warming even existed in the first place. And the people who are leading the church now, they're not just in their 70s, they're in their 80s and 90s. President Nelson's 99. In several months, he'll turn 100 years old. Like in the 90s, he was already an old man. And and so this is the mindset that we have leading the church, is those who did not know at first that there was a climate crisis, and then at least their peers denied that there was a climate crisis. I don't know what they personally think, but their generation does not like to admit that there's a climate crisis. Well, you also have to think about, even though President Nelson is basically, he could be considered a scientist, of course, because he's a medical doctor. He's one of the only people who could be considered a scientist since the death of Joseph, the death of Joseph F. Merrill, who was an engineer who I believe died back in the 1960s. I don't think we've had a scientist since then. Probably because we've had Joseph Fielding Smith was so anti-science, and he was so influential for a long time that he would not appoint anyone could get through with Joseph Fielding Smith around. But the point of the matter is that think about President Nelson and his scientific acumen. He says that dogs have always been dogs. He's denied evolution. He's a young earth creationist. He said that the earth is 6,000 years old in the Young Adult Devotional last year. He's talked about biblical patriarchs who lived to be hundreds of years old, thousands of years old. He believes in a literal Tower of Babel. He believes in Noah's flood. When you have someone who is making claim after claim of scientific claims that believes that the fables that come from the scriptures, from the Book of Mormon, from the Bible, who believes those fables literally, then you're trying to tell that same person, hey, can you take a look at this science that we have over here? It's very hard to take someone who's 99 years old and steer them to correct science after they have filled their head with so many disproven scientific facts.
Yeah, you can teach an old dog new trick, and he is a very, very old dog. He's been around for, as he pointed out himself, he has been around for almost 10 whole decades.
Yes, he has.
That could be a benefit to people in the church, and it could be a hindrance if he's not willing to continue to learn.
Well, and that's the thing about President Nelson is that what has he said about what he calls how do you learn? How does President Nelson espouse that a person should learn? He says that you should learn only from trusted sources. It's a circular line of reasoning. You don't open yourself up to outside sources of knowledge, because he says that we should only be learning from what he calls pillars of truth, meaning the standard works, meaning LDS prophets. Learning from Al Gore, that's not on his radar. Yeah, Al Gore, in fact, he said you should never take counsel from those who don't believe. Some people want to make that out as he's saying, oh, don't take spiritual counsel. I disagree. He said, don't take counsel from those who don't believe, and that would include climate scientists and people along those lines.
Well, pushing back a little bit, looking at the entire paragraph within context, it seems like he is talking about spiritual matters. I think it might have been on purpose that he left out the word spiritual so that you can interpret it to mean anything. But assuming that he was even meaning spiritual, what in Mormonism is not spiritual? Up until 4 years ago, every single life decision of mine was made with the church in mind. What would make it like it? As a young man, I thought about how neat it would be to go to pilot school and become a pilot. And you know why I didn't? Because I couldn't hold down a calling in my ward if I was a pilot. And that was the reason why I did not even look into how or where to go to pilot school to become a pilot. So I thought now about, like, could I go to pilot school now and start a new career now as I'm getting close to my 40s? But yeah, what in Mormonism is not spiritual? Everything is spiritual, isn't it?
Well, yeah, it's like what Brigham Young said. He said, if there are any truths in the world, they belong in Mormonism. And he did use the word Mormonism. Okay. Yeah. And Joseph Smith said that all intelligence is spiritual. It's just more refined. So essentially all matter is spiritual matter. All the energy of the universe is spiritual in form. That's going back to the intelligence, the concept of an intelligence as Joseph Smith taught it from the King Follett discourse and other discourses. So yeah, your point is absolutely is right on. That's for sure. Okay, a couple last articles here to take us out of here. And I'm sure you've probably been watching here the terrible war that's happening, the terrible conflict in Palestine and in Israel and Palestine here. And the BYU Jerusalem Center tweeted this out, that all students at the BYU Jerusalem Center have been reported as safe and accounted for following the Hamas militant group's attack on southern Israel on Saturday morning, October 7th, according to the university statements here. And everybody's thankful for that in the comments. They say it's very upsetting. I do find it very interesting. I just wanted to make one comment about it, is that if everyone wasn't accounted for, if things were in trouble, do you think that it would still be printed by the Deseret News? That's the question. I know that's a hypothetical. What do you think?
Yeah, it's tough to say, because sometimes, say when a missionary dies, you don't hear it on KSL or Deseret News. You hear it from some other news source. it's tough to say how forthcoming they would be if their students were put in harm's way and were actually hurt.
Yep, that's what I'm wondering. If everything wasn't all well in Zion, if Zion was not prospering, would we hear about it? I know it's hypothetical. I do wonder about that. But it also reminds me of that old section from Revelation chapter 11. It says, this is from the church's edition of the scriptures. It says, in the last days, 2 prophets will be slain in Jerusalem, and after 3.5 days, they will be resurrected, and then Christ will reign upon the earth. You remember that old scripture from Revelations?
Yeah, I always wondered about that. When will that happen, and who is it going to be?
Well, let me tell you this, Ryan, that is not going to happen any time soon. Because, for instance, President Nelson, he has not left the state of Utah except one time in the last 4 years, and he went on a weekend jetaway to Washington, D.C. Temple. And
is that right? He's been in Utah the whole time other than that?
He has not left the state of Utah except for 1 weekend to dedicate the Washington, D.C. Temple in the last 4 years. Okay,
wow,
so
it's quite the statement for the leader of a worldwide church.
Right, yeah, he doesn't go to Maui when there's a terrible disaster there. He didn't go to the Tonga, or the Tonga is the most Mormon place on earth. The church claims 50% of Tongans are Latter-day Saints. It's not quite that high, but it is per capita. They had a terrible volcano a year and a half ago. He didn't go to visit them. He doesn't go to visit Ukraine. He doesn't go to visit the Jerusalem Center and the saints in Israel. He doesn't go anywhere. And I don't think you're going to see that change when we have all of the people who are lined up to replace him. Oaks is in his 90s. Ballard is in his 90s. They're all extremely old. So to get these guys to Jerusalem, I promise you this: President Nelson will never step foot. You can write this down. He will never step foot in Jerusalem before he dies. So that's just not going to happen. He just fell in the last General Conference. He's not going anywhere. It does make me wonder how in the world this prophecy would ever be fulfilled by an LDS prophet, since they can barely get out of bed.
Yeah, I would always justify in my mind that it has to be just one of the apostles, who are all technically prophet seers and revelators. So my wife and I, up until a few years ago, would still speculate, who is it going to be? And when, like, Elder Bednar is going to be the prophet one day, and he's going to be the prophet for at least a decade, maybe 2, because of how young he is. So is he young enough, or is it going to be someone below him?
Well, I can tell you this, Ryan. If they hold the Silicon Slopes in Jerusalem,
that'll get them there. That's what needs to happen. When we hear that news, then we know the second coming really is around the corner.
That's all we need, is another Silicon Slopes, because that's what we really need in order for Elder Bednar to get himself to Jerusalem. Other than that, I don't see himself going there. That's all I can say here. Okay. Hey, you found this article. You personally found this one, and I just wanted you to. Why did this tickle your fancy? It says, "Does Mormonism ruin faith?" And this is from the Catholic World Report. Why was this interesting to you, Brian?
Well, this was interesting to me partially because it's from a Catholic website about Mormonism, but it's speaking to the fact that when people leave the Mormon church, they don't just leave the Mormon church. They tend to leave religion as a whole. And that doesn't happen so much in other faith traditions that are not as demanding, not as, I don't know if fundamentalist is the right word, but this article points out that because
high demand religions, high demand.
Yeah, because it is so high demand, there's a lot that someone has to do in leaving the church. There's a lot mentally. It's really taxing on a person because of all that goes into it, all that you've put your life into, only to have a faith change, that this new perspective of this was all for naught. And then people tend to continue on from there and just go down this rabbit hole. Well, if this wasn't the case, then what else? And I've seen it over and over again. They deconstruct their Mormon faith, and then they deconstruct religion as a whole, and then they deconstruct their politics, and then they deconstruct their family relationships and the even inner psychology, and you just keep going and going, and you totally revamp your whole life. So it's really interesting for me to see this recognized from a different source, not from an ex-Mormon, not from a non-religious source, but from a Catholic source, because it doesn't happen with their faith.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the article, it says that only a third of people who leave the church end up in any organized religion. That's extraordinarily high levels of not having a religion altogether. And it says that 21 states have seen a decline in LDS membership in the last brief period of time, in the last year or two. And one of the biggest surveys is a Washington Post survey said that 50% of Latter-day Saints in the last 15 years, 50% have disaffiliated themselves from the church from a period of 2008 until 2022. It went from 1.8 million people in the United States, adults identifying themselves as Mormons, down to 1.2. That's a 50% drop in only 15 years. So it's a 3% of people are leaving the church. So it's just talking about, when people leave the church, they leave extremely hard, and they become, a lot of them just become atheists, and it's the old stereotype. They become angry atheists, and
it's the biggest, the fastest growing religious group in the United States, maybe even I think it's just in the United States, the statistic that I've heard, are the nuns. There's a nickname for the NONES, nuns, those who don't like to identify with any religious organization, and that is the largest or the fastest growing group in the United States right now.
Yeah, it definitely is. There's a lot of people who are leaving organized religion. It's not just the church, but across the board. If you were to, go in a time machine, go 400 years in the future, go 4,000 years into the future, the percentage of people who would still have a belief in God, if we are to believe all the surveys, every survey of organized religion, ever since these surveys have been founded, has showed that people are leaving religion. This kind of conspiratorial, but if we ever met an alien advanced civilization, I'd be very surprised if any of them believed in anything supernatural or any supreme beings, just because of the trajectory that people are currently on. And the church is, when people leave, they just leave extremely hard. It really rips up a lot of families. It's very traumatic. And really, I think that's what your TikTok channel is kind of all about, is saying, from a heartfelt place, you say, Ryan, I've been where you have been. I've walked your same path. I feel your pain. And let's empathize together. Let's ruminate. Let's have some compassion. Instead of think celestial, let's just think, instead of celestial, let's just think compassion.
Yeah. That's one of my main goals, is to help people be seen, because when you leave the church, it is hard. It is hard on every aspect of you for so many people. And if I can just be a source of either, I make funny videos that might just be entertaining, just to lighten someone's day, or more serious videos to really try to connect with people. If I can at least do that, then mission accomplished.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, we're going to be watching your TikTok channel very carefully. You've always got a lot of great stuff on your channel. I'm going to be following it, see if I can get my channel anywhere near to yours. I think it'll take a long time. I don't know if I have it in me, but I'm watching, and everybody else should watch it too. I want to thank you so much, Ryan. Thanks for coming on the Mormon News Roundup this week.
Thank you for having me. This has been so much fun.
Yeah, now we drop these episodes live every Sunday night on YouTube at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you join us at that time, you can interact with your humble host here. We'd be very grateful for that. Now, you can find us on Instagram. We're also on Instagram. We're on Facebook. And you can also drop us an email to kolob@mormonnewsroundup.org. I want to give a shout out to Weird Alma for this episode's music. And Ryan, thanks so much for ruminating with me on the great and spacious beehive, as we call it. And remember, no unhallowed hand can stop this podcast from progressing. So long.
When it comes to nicknames of the church, such as LDS Church, the Mormon Church, to remove the Lord's name from the Lord's church is a major victory for Satan.
Satan.